Thomas Scherer owns and runs Pulse Pharmacy, which is just off Whitlock Avenue, right behind the Waffle House. And you do a bunch of cool stuff, like you do your own compounding?
Yes, sir. We compound for humans and animals, and then we package meds for months so that patients who might have a little bit of difficulty or just quite frankly don't want the hassle, we package them up daily and have them ready that, lets them have the ability to do other things.
Right. And you tell people when their prescriptions are running out.
We do. We try and stay on top of refills, talking and communicating with the doctor.
Having somebody that's got your back, especially when it comes to prescriptions, is a great service to have. And the website is
poolsrx.com.
Bring the museum back to life.
People sit out on the front porch hoping people will come by.
Go forth and do good.
It's insane. I have the most understanding wife in the world.
I treat everybody the same thing.
Oh, that's the other thing I love about Marietta. It's like a melting pot.
You are listening to Marietta Stories. Each week, veteran podcaster Bill Nowicki brings you the heartwarming, interesting, and fun stories from the people that make the community of Marietta, Georgia, a place to call home. Here's your host, Bill Nowicki.
Hey everybody, welcome to Marietta Stories Podcast. Today I have Chuck McPhilamy of the Marietta Police Department. He's talking a lot about the innovative programs they have in the city. And one thing I want to add, he talks about CIT training, which is crisis intervention training. And they took that through NAMI Cobb. nbsp.org is their website, but they are a great organization. I want to add to the show notes where you can give to their October 6th. They have a walk, which is their major fundraiser for the year. And they want to be the number one chapter in Georgia, which they were last year for the walk. So if you don't mind helping them out, that would be great for everyone. And as you know, about 26%, you might not know, 26% of the folks in our county suffer with some form of mental illness. So we really have to think about how we're going to help folks. And they're a great advocacy group, and they also train people that are dealing with loved ones that have mental illness. So check it out, and let's get started. Here's Chuck McPhilamy. All right, I have Officer Chuck McPhilamy of Marietta City Police, and he's the media person. We've known each other for a little while now, and I want to talk to him about, there's a lot of stuff going on, reaching out in the community here in Marietta to make folks safer, but also help build the community. Kind of talk about some of the programs you guys have to try to help build Marietta, not just police it.
Well, I think the reality is any community across the country is stronger when you have a close working relationship between the residents of that city and the police department that's there to uphold the laws and serve and protect. We're very proud of the relationships that we've built with lots of different organizations in the community, and that stems from our command staff setting up things like a pastor's police academy. We have one coming up in October. If anyone listening to this has a faith-based organization of any type that they attend regularly, we would encourage them to speak with the leaders of that organization and ask, have you ever sat down with your local police department? Have you asked all of the tough questions that are probably on those faith-based leaders' minds? Hey, why did they give that person a ticket? Hey, why did this thing happen? Why, when we charged something in a story, why was someone else not charged? Or what happened in this story? Those are all questions that sometimes we have to protect the legal system and allow everyone to have their day in court. But behind closed doors in a meeting setting, without talking about all of the specifics of the case, it's important for leaders within the community to be able to ask those tough questions. It's also important on a different level for the residents to be able to do that themselves. Last night we had I believe it's the second or third meeting of our latest Citizens Police Academy. We have several of these academies. The idea is that we want to get a group of people together that have a similar base because they're coming at these questions from a similar background. And when you put them in a room together, it starts a dialogue that grows. Instead of one person sitting in the room who may or may not be comfortable asking those questions, When you put 15, 20, 30 in a room at a time with a group of different police with varying roles, from detective to, in my case, public information, to just uniform patrol, it gives them the opportunity to ask those questions, and it stems great conversation. Those types of academies are what make this community stronger. That, coupled with an extensive training, we as a police department, by state levels, have very minimal amounts of hours that are actually required each year to maintain that title of uniform patrol officer or sworn police officer. In this particular department, the command staff feels that it's incredibly important to go above and beyond that, to work through scenarios of what could happen and be ready tactically. And we don't talk about those because it's never a good thing for a police department to talk about what tactics they're training. And you're basically giving your playbook to your opponent and saying, here's what I've got. But for us to stay ahead of the curve, just in case, while we have a fantastic community and we don't expect there to be problems, certainly you want us ready. And then also to go through different courses like you and I have talked about in the past, crisis intervention training. We as a society, not just the city of Marietta, but we as a society are facing a mental health crisis that we haven't seen historically. If you went back and just looked over the last 100 years, you would see a very drastic change in the way the government decided to deal with people who were suffering with some sort of mental health issue. From institutionalization to taking that apart to ending that era of we need to just lock people up who aren't like us, right? To now, how do we really help that person? If I have that person who may or may not behave in a way that seems normal to you and I, may or may not stay in the home, may choose, and this is a tough one for people to wrap their mind around, may choose because of schizophrenia or other ailments that they just want to live out on the street, that they don't want to live in one of our homes. Those are tough choices for you and I to accept because we feel like, no, that's wrong. They're not getting the help they need. We need to be there to help them. At the end of the day, they're still making their own informed choices. Certainly, if they're not with the capacity to make those choices, well, then how do we help that individual? If they do have enough of their faculties that they can make those choices, is it wrong for someone to choose that life? Well, I think I can speak for both of us when I say you and I would think that was strange, but just because you and I choose to pay a mortgage and have a house doesn't necessarily mean that's what everyone would choose. Learning how to deal with that while wearing a uniform and a badge has a very different outcome. When you know you're going into a scenario that you have an individual who may behave differently, but not criminally differently. Doesn't mean they have a weapon. It just means that, go back to schizophrenia. Fortunately, I've never had to deal with that. I can't imagine what it would be like hearing some of the scenarios because I've seen some of them just watching videos. Having multiple voices that you're hearing that aren't there, but not being able to turn that off. I can't imagine how I would react if I were that person with schizophrenia and you walked up to me and tried to carry on a conversation. Am I going to answer you or am I going to answer these voices that I'm hearing? Those are very real things that are happening. So for us as police officers to be trained ahead of those scenarios, that's a game changer. To know that I can walk into a scenario and be able to identify this might be a person with autism. This might be a person with some sort of mental issue that I'm not able to diagnose and don't necessarily need to diagnose, but I do need to change my reaction. And I do think of it as a filter. We look at things through a filter, whether we intend to or not, how we were brought up, where we were raised, what part of the country or what country we were raised in. All of those things form a filter for us. If I can approach those scenarios now in in uniform when I'm responding to a call, and I can know that this might be a person who is high or low functioning with autism, who has some sort of history of mental health, it allows me to handle that situation in a manner that I think we would all say is more humane and more appropriate, maybe measured. Those are things that we all want, but it takes time and it takes training. And we're incredibly fortunate as a police department that our command staff has dedicated so many hours. Each one of us have now been...
It's like 40 hours for a class.
It is. Just that crisis intervention training alone.
I got to talk to some of the real estate agents at Johnny Walker Realty. One of them was Shannon Van Horn, and this is what she had to say about working with Johnny and Carrie.
I've been with a couple different brokers, but this is by far my favorite. Literally nothing that they haven't been able to find an answer for me. If they don't have the answer, they're going to talk to each other and figure out an answer and then get back to us. When I tell people that I'm now at Johnny Walker Realty, there's nobody that doesn't know who they are. So that's nice.
Real estate agents that are happy do better for their clients and the business. That's what I think is helping Johnny Walker Realty grow so quickly. Remember, they're at 262 Church Street, just down from the square. Check them out.
Think about private sector. Think about the average person working in the private sector having 2 weeks of paid vacation, and that being a stretch for an employer to pay for that. Well, you're talking about the city now dedicating 40 hours worth of every one of our uniformed patrol officers, 135 of us, 40 hours dedicated to not only have multiple trainers present, but also have every one of our officers go through that, to tour local facilities that are geared towards helping those in need, to meet with people who are dealing with some of these mental health challenges, and have them sit in a room and have a dialogue with us about what it is they think when they see the police arrive, how they react, how some of them will choose to self-medicate with alcohol or drugs, legal or illegal, to try and combat the voices they're hearing or try and combat some of the challenges they have. That was incredibly eye-opening, and I think I speak for all of the officers when I say we respond to calls differently and better now that we've had that training.
Yeah. And, part of my goal here with the podcast is building community, and that starts with a conversation. So I really appreciate you having this conversation. And I think when you go on those situations as a police officer, I think you're mostly trained to say, how do I secure the area, and your goal is to make sure people don't get hurt. But when you're dealing with somebody that's mentally ill, that might be really agitated, your goal is probably to get them to calm down, which is a whole new set of skills.
It is. It's a challenge. The person sitting listening to this right now, if I walked up to them and I said, show me your hands, don't put your hands in your pockets, simple, straightforward, not yelling, not screaming, simple, straightforward commands, right? Because that's what I'm doing at that moment. I'm trying to make sure that nothing sudden happens that causes me to react in a like manner. If I'm now dealing with someone who isn't in their right mind, they're not going to respond to those simple commands. And too many times we see things on video across the country where it just looks ugly. Sometimes it does look ugly. You and I have looked at some of those scenarios together. In a perfect world, we're trying to subdue that individual who's now out of control. We didn't choose to walk into that scenario. And I think people forget that. In a perfect world, we would have said, I don't think I really want to go to that call. Can you send me over to the alarm call instead, and I'll go check that building where the alarm's going off? Or can I go zone patrol that local city park with all the beautiful flowers and great trees, right? But that's not the role that we agreed to take on. We agreed to take on this role of protecting and serving. So when someone calls us and says, I need help, send the police, click. And now we show up and there's someone there behaving totally out of control. It's a process to try and get that person to cooperate. Having been through that 40 hours worth of training and now ongoing training that we're still receiving with crisis intervention, it allows our officers to know somewhat what to expect, and to give us a few extra tools, if you will. Tools in the form of knowledge. Not a new tool on the tool belt, but a new way to
Which is pretty crowded, by the way.
Yeah, they are. You are correct. Truly, the best tool that they give us is the knowledge. Our voice, our mind, those are the things that we would prefer to use in every scenario. I speak for every officer across the country. None of us wants to grab any of the tools on the tool belt. They're there in case we have to use them. In a perfect world, we've gone through the training and we have the ability to try and communicate so effectively with someone that we're able to get them to calm down, or we're able to simply hand-to-hand, just wrestling, go through with this individual to get them where they're at a place that we can get them to calm down, or we can get them into handcuffs if appropriate, when appropriate. And I agree, it's a conversation. We as a community have an amazing city square. We have an amazing city government, the parks, the schools, the education. It's a fantastic community to live and work in. We really do have a fantastic community. As a police department, it's crucial for us to stay partnered with each one of those organizations. The relationship we have with the Marietta City School System and the school board, the superintendent, the relationship that we have with city parks, with the different organizations here, the faith-based organizations, the large businesses that are here that are bringing in so many different employees. You have an amazing community, and it stays that way and will continue to grow that way as we continue conversations like this. It's important for us to stay plugged in.
Well, that's great. And I appreciate all you guys do to try to keep us safe. And, you know, you guys are on the front lines. I can't imagine having to walk into scenarios where there's so much emotion, there's so many things going on, and there's people coming in and out, and try to sort through that and make sure everybody's safe. Now, how do folks get a hold of you or want to learn more about these programs you guys have here?
We have a pretty strong social media presence. We would encourage you, if you haven't signed up for NICSL, go on to our own city website, mariettaga.gov. There's a link there under services to police. If you go into that section under police, you'll see a whole series of different informative places. It's going to tell you about upcoming meetings. It's going to tell you about upcoming academies. It's going to tell you about conversations that we've had between the chief and different leaders. It's going to educate you on different things that are happening. It's also going to give you a link it'll ask you, ironically, do you want news faster than a helicopter? It gives you a link to NICSL. NICSL is a way that we can communicate effectively quickly with anyone that's signed up for it. I can push out a message, and within a few seconds, everyone who's signed up for it receives that same message. You're able to get that in a text on your phone as well as an email. If that's not your style and you prefer Twitter, we're on Twitter. We're on Facebook. We're on Nextdoor. We're on Instagram. Stay in touch with us. Follow us. It's important for us to know what's happening within our community in both directions. Reach out to us if you feel like there's something that we need to check into. It is worth noting while we're talking briefly, having all of these different ways to communicate has posed a new challenge. How do we as a police department respond to people through so many different channels and not have someone accidentally slip through the cracks? We've come up with the city actually has come up with a new way for us to handle that. If you go back to that city website, mariettaga.gov, there is a link called Citizen Request. If you click that Citizen Request, it's going to give you any example from pothole to street lights out to suspicious activity to sanitation questions, all of those city-related services that we receive as residents of the city. If you have a concern and it doesn't need an officer dispatched immediately, but you want it looked into, hey, there's ongoing suspicious activity at a house in my neighborhood. Okay, well, that may not be something that makes sense to have a car just run up on with lights and sirens, but it might be something that we need to have somebody watch that house and see whether there's criminal activity happening. That citizen request is going to be the perfect place for you to go because it creates a paper trail for our whole command staff to be able to follow up and make sure that it's been handled. And if you're willing to, if you'll put in your phone number or your email address, we'll send you updates with every step of the way of what we've done to try and address your concerns.
Cool. And again, thanks for your time. I know you're a busy man. It's been a busy week for you, but I appreciate what you guys are doing and keeping us safe so we can enjoy like concerts on the square and the Chalktoberfest and all the great things we have happening here, and we can enjoy it as a community. So thank you.
Thank you.
All right, there you have it. Chuck McPhilamy of Marietta Police Department. This is Bill Nowicki saying thank you for listening to Marietta Stories Podcast. Tell a couple friends about the show. Go to the Apple Podcast app to leave a review. It really helps the show. And I'll see you next week.